Number 1. Canning and pressure preserving. The Appalachian grandmother's pantry was her insurance policy. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with glass mason jars containing green beans, tomatoes, corn, soup mixtures, fruit preserves, pickled vegetables, and meat enough to carry a family from the last autumn harvest to the first spring planting with nothing purchased from a store in between. Canning was not a weekend hobby. It was a weeks-long annual operation conducted with the precision of a military campaign. The timing of the harvest determined the timing of the canning, and both had to happen in the same narrow window before the food spoiled or the cold came. She knew exactly how long each vegetable needed in the pressure canner to be safe. She knew which jars had sealed properly by the sound they made when the lid was pressed. She knew which batches to prioritize and which could wait another day. A single productive canning season could put up 300 to 500 jars of food, enough calories, enough nutrition, enough variety to sustain a household through months of snow and mud when nothing fresh was available at any price. The knowledge was technical, the execution was physical, and the stakes were the health and survival of everyone who depended on her getting it right. Number 2. Smoke curing meat. Before refrigeration existed in mountain homes, meat had to be preserved through smoke, salt, and time. The smokehouse was one of the most important structures on any Appalachian homestead, a small wooden building where hams, shoulders, bacon slabs, and sausages hung from the rafters over a slow smoldering fire of hickory, apple, or cherry wood that burned for days without interruption. The Appalachian grandmother who managed the smokehouse understood the science of preservation intuitively, even if she never would have called it that. She knew that the combination of salt cure, smoke, and controlled temperature created an environment hostile to the bacteria that caused spoilage. She knew how long each cut needed to hang, how to judge doneness by color and texture and smell, and how to store the finished product in the cool dark of the cellar through a summer that could last 6 months. A properly smoked and cured ham from an Appalachian smokehouse could last a year or more without refrigeration and taste better at the end of that year than anything a modern grocery store has ever put in a plastic package. The craft is being rediscovered by artisan producers who charge $40 a pound for a product her grandmother made every winter as a matter of course. Number 3. Lard rendering. Nothing on the Appalachian homestead went to waste, and nothing demonstrated that principle more completely than the rendering of lard from the fat of the autumn hog. After the hog was butchered, every piece of fat was collected, cut into small pieces, and cooked slowly in a large iron kettle over an outdoor fire until the fat cells released their liquid content and the solid pieces, called cracklings, floated to the surface. The rendered lard was strained, poured into crocks, and stored in the cold cellar where it would keep through the winter as the primary cooking fat for everything that went into a skillet or an oven for the next 12 months. The cracklings left behind were not discarded. They were salted and eaten as a snack, or mixed into cornbread batter to produce a version of that bread so rich and flavorful that modern food writers who encounter authentic crackling cornbread for the first time treat it as a revelation. Lard rendered properly from pasture-raised pork fat is now sold in specialty food stores for premium prices as a rediscovered cooking fat with a higher smoke point than most vegetable oils and a flavor profile that no manufactured shortening has ever come close to matching. Number 4. Soap making. Every Appalachian household made its own soap, and the grandmother who managed the process understood a chemical reaction that most modern people have never witnessed outside of a high school classroom. Wood ash from the fireplace was collected through the winter and leached with water to produce light, a strongly alkaline solution that, when combined with rendered animal fat in precise proportions, produced soap through the process of saponification. The recipe existed in her memory, adjusted for the strength of the lye and the type of fat available. Too much lye in the soap was harsh and damaging to skin. Too little and it wouldn't clean properly. The balance was found through experience and judgment, not measurement, because standardized measurements were not always available and the raw materials varied enough from batch to batch to make rigid formulas unreliable. The finished soap was poured into wooden molds, cut into bars, and cured for weeks before use. A single soap-making session produced enough bars to last a family a full year. Artisan soap makers today sell bars made by this exact method for $8 to $15 each at farmers markets across Appalachia, and the people buying them are paying premium prices for something her grandmother produced from waste materials as a practical necessity. Number 5. Drying and dehydrating food. Before pressure canners were available in every general store and before home refrigeration existed, drying was one of the primary methods of food preservation in Appalachian households. Green beans threaded onto string and hung from the rafters of the porch to dry in the late summer air, called leather breeches, were a staple that could be reconstituted in a pot of water with a ham hock months later and produce a dish with a depth of flavor that fresh beans cooked the same day cannot replicate. Apples were peeled, cored, sliced thin, and laid on wooden drying racks in the sun or near the stove until they became the dried rings that could be stored in cloth bags and reconstituted into pies and cobblers through the winter. Corn was dried on the cob and then shelled, dried herbs were bundled and hung throughout the kitchen, and mushrooms gathered from the forest floor were strung and dried for winter soups. The knowledge of what dried well, how to dry it properly, how long it would keep, and how to use it months later was the difference between a well-stocked winter kitchen and a hungry February. Number 6. Root cellar management. The root cellar was the Appalachian grandmother's refrigerator, freezer, and dry storage all in one underground room, and managing it properly through a long mountain winter was a genuine skill that required understanding of temperature, humidity, airflow, and the specific storage requirements of dozens of different crops. Potatoes needed darkness and cool temperatures but could not be stored near apples, whose natural ethylene gas caused them to sprout prematurely. Carrots and turnips kept best packed in damp sand. Winter squash needed dry conditions and moderate temperatures. Onions required good airflow and would rot quickly if crowded. Cabbage heads could be stored whole in cool conditions but produced a smell that permeated everything around them. The grandmother who managed a well-stocked root cellar through February and emerged in March with most of her stores intact and usable had done something that required months of planning, careful harvesting at exactly the right stage of maturity, precise storage conditions, and regular monitoring through the winter to catch problems before they spread. The reward was a family fed. The failure was a family hungry. There was no third option. Number 7. Butter churning and dairy management. Fresh milk from the family cow was never simply drunk and discarded in an Appalachian household. It was managed as a resource with multiple outputs, each extracted at the right moment in the right sequence. Fresh milk was used directly. The cream that rose to the top was skimmed and collected. Accumulated cream was churned into butter. A process of physical labor that took between 20 and 45 minutes of continuous agitation depending on temperature and fat content, producing a pound or more of fresh butter and a quantity of buttermilk as a byproduct. The buttermilk went into cornbread and biscuits and pancakes. The butter was packed into crocks, sometimes preserved under salt for longer storage, and used as both a cooking fat and a condiment through the weeks ahead. Excess milk that couldn't be consumed before souring was cultured into clabber, pressed into simple fresh cheese, or used in cooking where the slight acidity was an asset rather than a problem. Nothing was wasted. Every output of the cow's daily production had a use, and the grandmother who managed that production knew how to extract every bit of value from it.